It was a blazing afternoon in Ouagadougou, and the air shimmered over the dusty city streets. President Ibrahim Traoré sat in the back of his modest official car, driven by a single chauffeur, no extravagant convoy in sight. He had just concluded a policy meeting in the capital, focused on expanding school access for rural children. But despite his schedule, Traoré always insisted on moving simply, no sirens, no fanfare. He believed leadership was service, not spectacle. If you believe in justice, faith, and people who change the world from the shadows, then the story of Ibrahim Traoré is one you can't miss. A leader without luxury, without a stage, only courage and a burning vision for Africa. This is a breathtaking journey, full of twists, revelations, and a truth that shook the world. Smash that like, share the truth, and subscribe now so you won't miss the next chapter in this revolution. Let's keep the spirit of African strength and self-reliance alive, together. As the car rolled to a stop at a congested traffic light, a foreign NGO observer, new to Burkina Faso, watched curiously from a nearby vehicle. He saw a barefoot child approach the presidential car and immediately muttered, "This is dangerous. Shouldn't someone stop her? Who lets children run between cars like this?" He reached for his phone to alert local authorities, unaware that history was quietly unfolding before his eyes. The danger he referred to was Awa, a frail, wide-eyed girl no older than 8. She wore a torn pink dress and carried a cracked plastic tray of peanuts and sweets. Her timid smile flickered as she stepped toward the car window, her voice almost lost in the hum of the engines. "Please, sir, would you buy something?" President Traoré's security instinctively moved to wave her off, just as they had done countless times before. But this time, Traoré raised his hand. "Let her come," he said calmly. He rolled down the window and looked her in the eye. There was something arresting in the girl's gaze, hopeful, yet tired beyond her years. "How much?" he asked. 50 francs, she replied, holding up a packet of peanuts. He handed her far more than that, enough to feed her family for days. But before she could thank him, he gestured to his driver. "Turn at the next street. Bring her along." Confused, the guards hesitated. But when Ibrahim Traoré spoke with that kind of conviction, no one questioned it. As the car turned off the main road, Awa was gently helped inside. She clutched her tray tightly, unsure if she was in trouble or in a dream. "Don't be afraid," Traoré said, leaning forward, his voice low and warm. "I just want to talk." She looked at him, unsure how to respond, but there was something disarming in his presence. She sat on the edge of the seat, trembling slightly, her tray still gripped like a shield. "What's your name?" he asked. "Awa," she murmured, eyes lowered. "That's a beautiful name," he smiled. "How old are you?" 8, she whispered. He nodded. "Do you sell these every day?" She looked up, hesitant, but then answered honestly. "Yes, sir. My mother is sick. I help by selling on the street." Traoré felt his throat tighten. He had met children like her before, but hearing it firsthand, seeing it this close, cut deeper. It was the face of a nation's struggle, worn by one small child. "Do you like studying, Awa?" he asked softly. Her eyes brightened for a moment. "I really liked it, sir. But I can't go anymore. My mother needs my help." And there it was, the brutal choice between survival and education. Between today's hunger and tomorrow's hope. Traoré knew that behind every child like Awa was a system that had failed. But it was also the reason he had entered politics. To change that system, not with pity, but with policy. "You deserve more than this," he said. "You deserve to play, to learn, to dream." She looked at him, confused. "Why would you say that?" "Because you matter," Awa. Every child in Burkina Faso matters. Later that evening, back at the presidential palace, Traore stood before his advisory team. I met a girl today, he began, holding up a small packet of peanuts. Her name is Awa. She sells these instead of going to school. This cannot continue. What followed was swift and bold, a national initiative rooted in African self-reliance. No longer waiting for foreign handouts or slow-moving donors, Traore directed state funds into a newly created program. It aimed to reintegrate out-of-school children, offering free meals, transportation, and family stipends, funded not by outside aid, but by new African money generated through tax reforms and locally managed industries. Burkina Faso will rise by its own hands, he declared. Through African unity, we will not only lift up our children but rewrite what it means to be a modern African nation. He didn't just talk, he acted. The next week, Traore returned to Awa's neighborhood, walking through narrow alleys alongside social workers, not in a suit, but in a simple cotton shirt. At her home, he met her mother, Fatou, frail, tearful, overwhelmed. We're here for you, he said. Not as a gesture. As a promise. He handed Awa a school uniform and a backpack filled with books. This is for your return to school. All I ask is that you study hard, and follow your dreams. And she did. Within months, Awa became one of the top students in her class. Her math teacher sent a letter to the palace, this child is a beacon. She is what can happen when we believe in our own. Sitting in his office late one evening, Traore read that letter again, his eyes fixed on the distant lights of Ouagadougou. This was the revolution he had dreamed of. Not through weapons. Not through charity. But through hope, policy, and the unstoppable force of African children given a chance. And he knew then, as long as Awa kept dreaming, he would keep fighting. President Ibrahim Traoré sat in thoughtful silence as Awa's words lingered in the air. Her voice, small but honest, was a mirror reflecting the invisible burden carried by thousands of children across Burkina Faso. He gently placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Awa, he said softly, you deserve to be a child. You deserve to play, to learn, and to dream. She looked at him, unsure whether to believe such kindness could be real. I promise, he continued, I will do everything I can to make sure you go back to school. Awa's eyes widened in disbelief. No one had ever said such things to her. The thought of going back to school felt like a fantasy. Yet, something in his voice, firm but fatherly, made her believe that maybe, just maybe, this promise could come true. Why, sir, she whispered. Why would you do that for me? Traore gave a quiet, thoughtful smile. Because you matter, Awa. Every child in this country matters. And because I believe children like you will shape the future of Burkina Faso. Awa lowered her head, overwhelmed. She couldn't find the words, but her silence spoke volumes. Her heart, once heavy with burden, now fluttered with unexpected hope. Before she left, Traore opened the car's center console and handed her a small notebook and a box of colored pencils. This is where you start writing your dreams, he told her gently. And together, we'll make them real. She accepted the gifts with trembling hands and a tearful smile. As she stepped out of the car, people on the street paused, watching curiously as the president of their nation knelt before a barefoot child with nothing but peanuts in her hands and fire in her eyes. Some clapped. Others whispered. But most were simply stunned by the humility and heart of the leader they thought they knew. Back at the palace, Ibrahim Traoré couldn't shake Awa's story from his mind. It wasn't just about her, it was about an entire generation left behind by a broken system. Words alone wouldn't fix it. Promises had to be followed by policy. Action had to rise from urgency. He summoned his closest advisors and social welfare experts that same night. "I met a girl today," he began, his voice carrying the weight of responsibility. "She's 8 years old. Her name is Awa. She sells peanuts instead of going to school. Her mother is sick. And this is the story of too many of our children." The room fell silent. Every advisor listened as Traore described their conversation and the emotional blow it delivered. "I want the data," he ordered. "How many children are out of school? Why? And what can we do, immediately, to fix it?" His team got to work. In just days, they uncovered what Traore had feared: tens of thousands of children just like Awa, forced to trade books for the burden of survival. The causes were no mystery: generational poverty, failing infrastructure, and fragile social safety nets that barely held families together. But Traore wasn't interested in excuses. He rejected charity. He rejected dependency. He believed in building what he called the new African model, one rooted in African unity and self-reliance. "No more waiting for permission from the West," he declared in a cabinet meeting. "No more depending on the crumbs of foreign aid. We will fund this ourselves, through new African money. Through our people. Our innovation. Our reform." And he meant it. Using domestic revenues from restructured trade agreements and fair taxation policies designed to reclaim Africa's wealth for Africans, Traore launched the Awa Project. It was a sweeping national initiative that offered every out-of-school child access to free education, meals, transportation, and psychological support. But it didn't stop there. Traore's government also provided small cash stipends to the most vulnerable families, an incentive to keep children in school and out of street labor. The funds came from within, not from foreign banks, but from rechanneled national resources, overseen with strict transparency. And he didn't stay behind a desk. Traore traveled across Burkina Faso, sometimes unannounced, to witness firsthand the conditions his people faced. In a sun-beaten village, he met an elderly woman named Fatou who shared a single room with her daughter and 3 grandchildren. "My granddaughter sells food in the streets," Fatou whispered. "She wants to study. But we have no choice." The pain in her voice was echoed in many homes across the country. And yet, wherever Traore went, he didn't bring speeches. He brought solutions: mobile classrooms, clean water, food baskets, uniforms, teacher training programs, all delivered with one guiding principle: Africa must heal Africa. This was not just reform. This was revolution, quiet, compassionate, and built on the belief that no one would save Burkina Faso but its own people. And the people followed. Faith leaders, educators, small business owners, everyone began playing a role. After-school programs flourished. Internships opened for youth. Teachers volunteered for extra hours. A nation that had once been fractured by doubt began rising as one. Under the banner of African unity, Traore didn't just lift a girl from the streets, he lifted the spirit of an entire nation. Awa was no longer a vendor. She was now a student. A citizen. A symbol. And Ibrahim Traoré? He wasn't just the president. He was the architect of a future dreamed in African ink, written in African hands, and paid for with new African money. A future where no child is forgotten. A future that had already begun. The woman's voice was frail, barely audible over the creaking tin roof of the tiny home. Her name was Fatou, elderly, sick, and visibly exhausted by the weight of survival. "My granddaughter, she sells food on the street," she whispered. "It's the only way we eat." President Ibrahim Traoré stood silently, his heart sinking at the sight before him. 5 people shared a cramped mud brick room. A thin mattress lay in the corner. A single light bulb flickered overhead. The words from earlier, "We have no other choice," cut deeper than any speech ever could. He had seen hardship before, but this was something else. This wasn't laziness. This wasn't negligence. This was reality, one of broken systems and limited options. Criticizing such families from afar was easy. Living their choices was another matter entirely. Back in the capital, data had already begun pouring in. But now it had a face, Awa. And Fatu. And the thousands like them. Even more alarming were the reports of what street children endured. Many had been exploited, some physically abused, others dragged into drug trafficking or petty theft. These children weren't just out of school, they were in danger. Traore could no longer afford to wait. He called for an immediate national response. "We cannot fix everything overnight," he told his cabinet, "but we can start by saving these children today." He instructed his ministers to draft an emergency plan that would provide immediate relief to vulnerable households, families like Awas and Fatus, while building a longer-term framework for change. Within days, a task force launched new initiatives. Food baskets were delivered across the poorest neighborhoods. Free medical clinics opened for parents like Fatu. Temporary shelters were established to protect street children from harm. These weren't handouts. They were lifelines. They were part of Traore's larger vision of African self-reliance, solutions powered by African people, for African people. But he knew real change would also need partnership. He reached out to international organizations, NGOs, and African regional bodies. Traore's message was clear: we're not asking for pity. We're asking for collaboration, a new model of African unity. Let's build together. The response was immediate. International groups pledged resources, but what surprised many was how Burkina Faso led the charge. Local businesses offered support. Farmers donated food. Churches opened their doors. Civil society didn't wait to be asked, they joined hands in a groundswell of national solidarity. But even as headlines praised the new programs, Traore's thoughts kept returning to one place, the corner of a traffic intersection where a little girl with a tray of peanuts had changed everything. Just a few days after that moment, he returned to Awa's neighborhood, this time, not alone. He brought with him a team of social workers, volunteers, and public servants. Their arms were full: food baskets, hygiene kits, and school supplies. At Awa's home, her mother Fatu sat in the doorway, still weak, but alert. When she saw the president step through the gate, her hands trembled. "Sir. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her eyes brimming with tears. "I never thought someone like you would come here." "You don't have to say anything," Traore said gently, kneeling beside her. "We're here to help. You and Awa deserve better." In the corner of the room, Awa sat quietly, sketching in the notebook he had given her just days earlier. When she saw him, her eyes lit up. She stood timidly, her tiny frame still holding the same spirit that had touched a nation. "I brought you something," he said with a smile, handing her a new school uniform and a backpack filled with supplies. "It's for when you return to school." Awa clutched the items, tears streaming down her face. She didn't speak, she didn't have to. Her mother cried too, but with gratitude this time. It was the first time in years that the future looked brighter than the present. But Traore wasn't done. He explained that Awa would be among the first to benefit from a new government program, one designed specifically for out-of-school children. Funded by domestic resources and new African money, the initiative provided not only free education, but also transportation, daily meals, and psychological support for those facing emotional or developmental hurdles. Yet Traore understood something else: education alone would not keep children in school if families remained trapped in poverty. So the government also launched a monthly cash support initiative for guardians who ensured their children stayed enrolled. The message was simple: when you choose school, we choose you. Traore looked at Awa once more. "There's only one thing I need from you," he said, kneeling to her level. "Promise me you'll study hard, and follow your dreams." "I promise," she whispered, smiling through her tears. And in that humble room, something extraordinary had begun, not just for Awa, but for an entire generation. A revolution built not with noise or protest, but with books, meals, and dreams. A revolution carried by unity, anchored in dignity, and powered by Africa's own hands. To ensure that families like Awa's no longer needed to rely on their children's labor, the government rolled out a cash transfer initiative, small monthly stipends offered to guardians who kept their children in school. The logic was simple: if you protected your child's education, the nation would stand with you. "You only have one thing to do," President Traore told Awa, crouching to her level once more. "Promise me you'll study hard, and follow your dreams." "I promise, sir," she replied, her face glowing with determination. Months passed, and Awa returned to school. Her transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. She quickly became one of the brightest students in her class, excelling in mathematics and art. Her notebooks, once filled with sketches of street corners and peanut trays, now held vivid expressions of a growing mind. Her teachers took notice. One day, a handwritten letter arrived at the presidential office. It was from Awa's teacher. "Awa is an inspiration to us all," it read. "She proves that when we give children the opportunity to learn, they can surprise the world." Ibrahim Traoré sat in his office late one night, the lights of Ouagadougou twinkling in the distance like quiet witnesses. In his hand was the letter. He read it twice, then once more. A silent smile curved across his face. This was why he had entered politics. Not for titles. Not for applause. But for children like Awa. Still, he knew the fight was far from over. Yes, the government's new initiatives had helped thousands of children across the country. But the roots of child labor, poverty, illness, underfunded schools, were still deeply embedded in the nation's soil. Structural reform would take years. And commitment. And unity. So Traoré prepared a national address. On the night of the broadcast, families across Burkina Faso gathered around radios and televisions. His voice echoed through cities and villages, from modern apartments to homes made of earth and straw. "Brothers and sisters of Burkina Faso," he began, "our children are our future. We cannot allow poverty to steal their dreams. The story of Awa is not just one story, it is the story of thousands." He paused, then declared, "Today, I renew my vow, no child should be on the streets when they should be in school. And no family should ever be forced to choose between medicine and education." The nation responded with a thunderous wave of support. Civil society groups organized community learning hubs. Churches and mosques opened their doors for after-school tutoring. Local businesses offered internships to teenagers seeking a path out of poverty. Teachers volunteered extra hours to help struggling students catch up. Across every province, the country mobilized, unified not by fear, but by hope. In the months that followed, Traoré's administration pushed even further. Rural schools received increased funding. New teachers were hired and trained. Mobile health clinics began visiting remote villages. Partnerships were forged with Internation. SRUMs provide school materials and support the vision of African-led progress. Still, not everyone believed in the dream. Some critics accused Traoré of reaching too far, too fast. Others whispered fears of corruption, wondering whether the money would ever reach the people who needed it most. Traoré answered not with speeches, but with transparency. He launched a public website that allowed every citizen to track how government funds were being spent on child welfare and education. He showed up unannounced to schools across the country, speaking directly to teachers, students, and parents. His leadership was not distant, it was present, visible, and humble. One day, during a surprise visit to a school on the outskirts of Bobo Dioulasso, Traore stepped into a classroom just as a girl was sketching a tree in her notebook. "Awa?" he asked, astonished. She looked up and grinned. "Yes, Mr. President. I'm learning about ecosystems today." They both laughed. Awa had grown. Her eyes still carried the same light, but now, they held something more: confidence, purpose, a quiet sense of belonging. Her teacher shared that Awa had become a leader among her peers, helping others stay motivated and catch up. The girl who once whispered for help at a traffic light was now a symbol of what Burkina Faso could be. Traore sat among the students for a while, listening and learning. Before leaving, he placed a gentle hand on Awa's shoulder. "Keep going," he said. "You are the future of this nation." Back in his car, watching the sun begin its descent over the land he loved, Traore fell silent. The road ahead was long. There would be obstacles, setbacks, and doubt. But there was also something more powerful: hope. And as long as there were children like Awa dreaming with open eyes and open hearts, he knew he would never stop fighting. Because the new Africa wasn't just an idea, it was rising. In classrooms. In homes. In policy. In unity. Led by its people. Funded by new African money. And protected by leaders who believed that greatness could begin with a girl, a promise, and a packet of peanuts. It began, as life-changing stories often do, with a misunderstanding. On a dusty afternoon in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, traffic crawled to a halt beneath a merciless sun. A convoy of vehicles slowed at a red light. In one of the lead cars sat a man in simple traditional dress, no security visible, no formal insignia. Observing from the car behind was a foreign consultant from an international development agency. He watched as a young barefoot girl approached the man's window, offering peanuts from a cracked tray. The consultant raised an eyebrow and scoffed, turning to his local aide. "Isn't this illegal?" he muttered. "This man's probably interfering with a child vendor. Should we report this?" It was, in fact, the opposite. The man in the car was Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso. And what the foreigner mistook for meddling was the beginning of a transformation. For one child, and eventually for the nation. That moment of misjudgment is a lesson in itself. How often do we misunderstand humility for weakness, or compassion for impropriety? How often does the world overlook leaders who serve quietly, just because they do not seek headlines or fanfare? What happened next revealed the depth of Traoré's vision, not just as a politician, but as a symbol of African unity and self-determination. The girl's name was Awa. No older than 8, she sold peanuts on the streets to help her ailing mother. When Traoré asked how much the peanuts cost, she replied, 50 francs. He gave her far more, but what he gave next was priceless. He invited her into his car, not to intimidate, not to interrogate, but to listen. In a world where leaders often speak more than they hear, this was the first twist in the story. He learned that Awa had once loved school, but had to drop out when her mother became ill. She worked to survive, sacrificing her childhood and her dreams. Many in her situation are never seen, only dismissed as statistics. But Traoré saw her. And he made her a promise: "You will go back to school. I will make sure of it." The story that began with suspicion turned into one of hope. But the lesson didn't end there. Back at the presidential palace, Traoré refused to let the matter rest as a photo opportunity. He called an emergency meeting. There are thousands like Awa, he said. And we are failing them. His response wasn't charity. It was policy. And it came from a place of new African thinking. Too often, African nations have been asked to wait for aid, for approval, for investment. But Traoré's approach was different. He believed in the power of new African money, wealth generated, managed, and distributed through fair taxation, restructured trade, and domestic innovation, not foreign dependency. He launched a national child support program, with cash stipends for families who kept their children in school. He rolled out free school meals, transportation, and psychological support. Clinics were dispatched to treat sick parents so children wouldn't have to abandon classrooms to become caregivers. In the villages, mobile schools and shelters sprang up. And most critically, he involved the nation. Teachers volunteered to tutor struggling students. Local businesses created apprenticeship programs. Civil society, faith leaders, and youth organizations rallied around a single shared purpose: African unity in action. The story of Awa became a movement. She was no longer just a girl with a peanut tray, she was a face for reform, a child whose dream inspired structural change. Months later, she returned to school, and within weeks, stood out as a gifted student in both math and art. Her teacher wrote a letter to the president: "She is a living example of what happens when we invest in our own." This story reminds us that real change doesn't always begin in parliaments or press rooms. It often begins with a moment of empathy. A hand extended. A promise made. And yet, the journey wasn't smooth. As support surged, so did skepticism. Some critics claimed Traoré's plans were too ambitious. Others worried about transparency. So he acted, creating a public tracking system for every franc spent. He visited schools unannounced, speaking directly with children and educators. His leadership was not about perfection, it was about participation and proof. One day, while visiting a school in the outskirts of Bobo Dioulasso, he found a girl sketching a tree in her notebook. "Awa?" he asked. She looked up and smiled. "Yes, Mr. President. I'm learning about ecosystems." Her growth was undeniable. Once a child of the streets, she was now a leader among her peers. Her eyes, once dulled by hardship, now sparkled with vision. And as she helped other children find their path, she proved that African self-reliance isn't an ideal, it's a generation in the making. So, what is the lesson in all this? It is that greatness can rise from the most unexpected places. That transformation doesn't require foreign miracles, it requires African courage, unity, and vision. That when leaders choose to listen instead of lecture, to act instead of pose, entire nations can shift. Ibrahim Traoré's leadership teaches us that African problems need African solutions, not copy-pasted models, but context-driven change rooted in dignity and resolve. And it teaches us that no child is too small to inspire a national revolution. The world may have misunderstood a simple encounter at a traffic light. They may have seen a poor girl and a man giving her money. What they didn't see was the future being rewritten in real time. Because in that moment, Africa wasn't waiting on anyone. Africa was rising, on its own terms.